Hi, everyone. I want to share a stat with you that recently stopped me in my tracks. 70 to 80% of managers aren't actually adding value to their organizations. That is a huge number. And honestly, it's not about their capability, it's about using outdated leadership models. This stat was shared with me by Dr. Richard Boyatzis of Case Western Reserve University. And he shared it really as a wake-up call. I personally see it as an invitation. So I hope you enjoy the conversation I had with Dr. Boyatzis. Really, we talked about what thriving leadership could look like in 2026 and beyond. Please reach out with any questions you have about it. Before we dive into the first question, all the questions I've been talking with leaders around the world on, given the disruptiveness of our time, all the turbulence that we're feeling, what does it mean to thrive as human beings, but also what does it mean to thrive as leaders? What does it mean to advance thriving in organizations, in teams, in societies, in the larger world? So I've got some questions for you about that, given all of your work and your latest book on the science of change. But before we do that, I wonder if you could give us just for people who might not know your work, a brief, just a sentence about how you got to where you are today. And I know it's been
Oh, I can, as my
been a
wife points out,
journey.
I can do this in 8 hours, so it's okay.
Great.
Um, my father was a waiter, legal immigrants to the U.S. from Greece, my mother and father. Um, so I grew up working class, always wanted to be in space. And although the PS 150 schools thought I should be left back because I showed signs of being slow, cognitively slow, because I spoke with a Greek accent and I could read
Mm.
Greek, but I couldn't read English, things like that. Anyway, fortunately, Sputnik went up and they retested everybody in the United States. They decided I'm really good in physics and math. So the next thing I know, my dream of being in the space program is happening. I got my first degree in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT. I specialized in control systems of interplanetary vehicles, but I ran out of money. And they got me a job doing the kind of research that I was getting trained to do. So I took 5.5 months off and went out and worked for Northrop Norair in Los Angeles in 1966. Saved enough money to finish, but in the process discovered that I really found the work boring.
Hmm.
Being in space is not the same as designing the vehicles for other people who had perfect vision in those days um, to be able to be in space. I flailed about, didn't want to go back into the restaurant business like all of my family um, in New York, and didn't think my music was good enough to really go pro. So I ended up thinking I'd go into management, took a course at MIT that introduced me to psychology not because it sounded good, it actually sounded like crap to me, but the professor introduced it by saying there were no tests. And later in all my clinical training, I discovered that I'm really test phobic. So anyway, so
Hmm.
that changed the course of my life because he introduced me to psychology, which I never knew existed really. I mean, I kind of heard of it, but I didn't really know what it meant. And it was one of those things that, in my world, rich people spend a lot of time um, wasting their time looking at their themselves about. But at any rate, the next thing I know, I mean, yeah, I wanted to do a research my term paper on why managers didn't help their subordinates because that was my experience out at Northrop.
Hmm.
I mean, I was in a department. There were two research departments, all Sheldons. All of us were either super smart or scary smart, but we're all weird, including the managers.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I couldn't believe how little they got out of us. Anyway, he offered me some data about how people helped or didn't help each other, 30-year-olds at MIT. And he liked what I did, offered me a summer job. The next thing I know, he's introducing me to people that I later would learn are legends in the field, giants in the field, even then, Ed Schein, Dave McClellan, who each became mentors of mine. I got into PhD seminars the following year, even though I was still a senior. And next thing I know, the group of them, Dave Kolb and Ed Schein and McClellan and a few others talked me into going for a PhD and not to go in management, but psychology. And next thing I know, I'm at Harvard.
Oh my
And
gosh. What is the time frame, Richard?
let's see, I graduated in 68.
Okay.
And so meanwhile, I was, having to deal with the draft board that wanted me to send me to. Now I'm very pro-military, but I happen to think that the Vietnam War was an ill-conceived war. But at any rate, um, I ended up really loving. I mean, I'm a scientist and I love research. So I started studying how people help others change in spring of 67.
Mhm.
And the early studies that we did and published became the rudimentary form of the theory that I've spent my 60 years working on, which I now call intentional change theory. And I started uh, training therapists and doing psychotherapy while I was in my program at Harvard. Because I mean, back in those days, when you studied psychology, you had the ability, especially at Harvard, to study all the different forms of psychology. So I was studying experimental psych, social psych, community psych, educational psych, organizational psych, clinical
Mm.
psych, personality psych. And fortunately, I was in a program that encouraged, because we also had to study sociology and cultural anthropology, the whole kind of social science view of it. So by the time I finished my PhD, I was doing research on motivation. I was doing research on competencies. I did one of the first empirical studies. And as a result of that, I'm often cited as one of the 5 people who started the competency movement in HR
Hmm.
in 1970. Dave McClellan and I were one team doing it. Marv Dennett at Minnesota and one of his doctoral students were doing it, and then a consultant in Minneapolis, Pat McClagan. We're the 5. But at any rate, but I was also, I mean, I turned down a teaching job at Yale from Richard Hackman, who later, when he was sitting in my office in Boston, said it was the smartest thing I did. Of course, he ended up leaving a few years later, as well as a lot of them. But I wanted to do research in psychotherapy. I didn't want to teach. So that's what I did. And um, the research company I joined had shrunk down to 4 of us. And by January of 76, we'd grown to 12 people, but had a crisis. And the board decided to let the CEO go. And all of a sudden, I became the president and CEO of the company. And it grew. I mean, we were a research company. We were doing all these competency studies and climate and style and motivation work and all that for clients literally all over the world. And um, at some point in the early 80s, we sold the joint with Yankelovich, Skelly and White, which was in those eras the most eminent market research firm in the country.
Mm.
And and then I became chief operating officer there for a few years. And then the Sachis bought us and Yankelovich, and it got so that it was more management and leadership of the firm than of the 2 firms than actual doing. So as I approached 40, I took an option that I'd had offered several times from my colleagues. I had a lot of colleagues from MIT and Harvard who were at Case, Western Reserve University
Hmm.
in Cleveland, both faculty as well as graduate students. And so that in 87, I became a professor and continued to work as I always have, whether it's through the psychotherapy I was doing with alcoholics and drug addicts, or the organizational change, or the team development, or the community development, or the leadership development. I mean, I've always worked on how to people change in a sustainable way.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, I've done a lot of physiological along with the psychological studies in the early 70s, especially when I was working on the effect of alcohol on aggression. But I got back into that in the early aughts and um, teamed up with a few neuroscientists and earned my stripes as a neuroscientist doing a whole series of fMRI studies, and then having published, I don't know, over a dozen papers by now. So I've looked at this issue of sustained desired change at every level, from individual to country levels. Um, my intentional change theory is the only fractal theory of change out there. I know every theory of organizational, community change, etc. None of the theories work identically, not isomorphically, but identically at every level.
Mhm.
So part of when I decided to put it all into my magnum opus, as they call it in academia, that came out last October, it was an attempt to put everything I'd ever done into one place. And it's not just my work. I mean, I cited the work of just under 2,000 other scholars that was
Yeah.
related to parts of this. But that's where I am today. I mean, a lot of the work is focused on coaching because that those relationships, whether you call coaching a process or a role, doesn't matter. Every manager, every leader, every parent has to be a coach. I mean, you're trying to motivate people to do things, to innovate, and all that. So, um, in a lot more than one sentence or 1 minute, that's kind of
I love it though. I love hearing the background, especially since we're just getting to know each other. I became acquainted with your work probably, I want to say maybe 20 or 25 years ago, and just reading different articles and kind of following your work as it went along. And
right.
um, the question that comes up for me now, I had a question that I was going to start with, but now I have a different
Okay.
question listening to you, and that is. In a world right now with a sense of kind of disruptions and turbulence going on, my sense is that many people, at least the leaders and teams that we're working with, feel like they've been thrown into change rather than making intentional change. So I want to hear more about the intentional change theory in just a second and what people can do. But I would love to hear your perspective of, well, first I'll ask you a question. Do you remember, or did you ever know Dr. Peter Kostenbaum?
No.
Okay. He was kind of a mentor of mine. You know, when you look back in your past, you realize some people were critical
Right.
mentors and you didn't even know it at the time. He was a critical mentor of mine, and he taught me this kind of idea that you're
Where
thrown.
was he? What school was he?
Oh gosh, I don't even remember. I think San Jose. He was in a university at San Jose, but he was his family was German. They had to um,
You know, Kasten. Oh
Koesten,
no, then I don't know.
Kostenbaum. Yeah. Yeah. So they fled from Germany to go to Venezuela
Yeah.
because of what was happening at Germany with Hitler. And then he ended up studying human beings, really studying human
Right.
beings. And he just recently passed. He was in his late 90s, just an incredible,
Oh,
incredible
that's too
human
bad.
being. Yeah, yes. But he taught me this idea that we are born into situations, whether it's our family, our genetics, our heritage, etc. We also are thrown into situations, but much of our life is figuring out where we have control and where we have freedom and where we can make intentional change. So when people feel like they are thrown into situations, like they're feeling thrown into the acceleration of AI, they're feeling thrown into political disruption, they're feeling thrown into whatever it is. Um, how do they, what's your sense of how they shift? Well, like what's happening with,
Well, do they? Is the first question. So let's first locate this.
okay,
Is this an unusual period of change? Not if you look at history.
okay,
I mean, believe me, from 1450 to 1525, the world changed in every field imaginable.
hmm,
And if you think there are changes today, it's nothing compared to that. We went through a similar epical period around 500 BC in which four of the five major religions of the world were founded. Um, we went through another period in 1775 to 1820 where democracy in a new form was born, written constitutions, all sorts of political upheaval. So it's not like humans haven't gone through this before.
Hmm.
And even COVID, I mean, the Black Plague was far more decimating. Hell, even the Spanish flu, which, by the way, also originated in China, um,
Hmm.
uh, killed a higher percentage of people. So, but within people's lived experience, except for people who lived in the Depression and then through World War II, um, certainly in North America and World War II, if you were in Europe or China, um, we haven't had anything that tumultuous since the late 30s and the 40s.
Yeah.
But it's worth remembering that we've been there before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hold that thought for a minute. Second, my research on competencies, where you try to look at what are the characteristics that predict effectiveness in all sorts of different jobs, including leadership jobs. I mean, my 82 book was the first published study across 6 major private sector and 6 major public sector organizations of looking at competencies against performance. Nobody else had ever published that before.
Hmm.
When you do that research, you discover something absolutely alarming about people in management and leadership, from project leaders up to CEOs, is that 70 to 80% of them aren't adding value.
Hmm.
70 to 80%.
Hmm.
Let me repeat that.
I
70 to
I got it.
80% in every organization, and that includes CEOs.
Hmm.
Now, that means that most of the people in leadership are at best mediocre. And it doesn't mean, and they could be taken out of their jobs and the organization would do better. Now, I'm not saying they should be fired, because many of them are good individual contributors. They just got promoted way above their heads.
Hmm.
They should be, like Bill Gates, phenomenal philanthropist, lousy organizational leader. He was a good deal maker. He should have stayed a deal maker.
Hmm.
Um, Microsoft would have thrived sooner than when Satya came along and took over, which is now, booming. But at any rate, so it starts with the notion, and in Business Week revealed the illusion I call the faux self of a part of this when they did this survey in the late 90s of tens of thousands of mid-level managers across North America, and found that 90% of them thought they were in the top 10% of the performance distribution. So I start with that observation. I mean, I'll start, but I add that to the other, and to say, you know, just because a person's in a job doesn't mean they're doing it well.
Hmm.
And it certainly doesn't mean they're doing it effectively. And
Hmm.
in fact, the data suggests there's a 20% chance that they might be doing it effectively, including CEOs, including presidents of countries,
Hmm.
including heads of nonprofits. So when you stop and think of that, then you say, okay, how people are reacting to the current situation may be an indication of their being over their heads already in the jobs,
Interesting.
that they, at some level, defensively think they're doing great. And that's why so much of this is perpetuated. People replicate themselves. So they promote people that look like them, or act like them, or perform like them, without really appreciating the fact that they may be creating more regression to the mean.
Hmm.
So now let's be descriptive. Yes, right now we're getting a huge amount of social, political, and economic disruption.
Hmm.
This follows a 5-year period of what most people's memories is or 100-year epidemic of COVID. COVID clearly exaggerated everybody's neuroses. No matter what you had, it got worse early on COVID. Those early months, um, we were fearing this unseen thing, and it wasn't topical. I mean, when I lived through the polio things from it was 1937 to about 1955, but they tended to happen in the summer and hit children. It was located. The AIDS epidemic was located to, at first, people who are homosexual, sex workers, and then people who use needles, and it kind of expanded. But again, it was localized.
Hmm.
If you didn't live in those worlds, you didn't have to worry about it except not, kind of in contact. COVID was everywhere. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew how it was being transmitted. And that scared the crap out of people. So not only did we have the financial disruption, because a lot of people, either lost, I don't know about a lot, but many people were anxious about their jobs. Not that many people lost their jobs, but there were entire industries, restaurants, hotels, and all that did. Um, but we also had this realization by a lot of people, um, which is once they were working at home and remotely, that their regular job really sucked, or their manager did. And
Hmm.
it wasn't surprising that a lot of people didn't want to go back to work. Um, it wasn't a matter of physically where they were, it was probably their managers and the climate of the organizations. So, what we have now is the motivation crisis we had in engagement and innovation problems before COVID, amped up because COVID really electrified it. In various countries of the world, we started watching from around the millennium till now a degree of rampant narcissism that, combined with the defensiveness from these acute stressors, led to a lot of rigidity. So, somewhere in the late 90s into 2000, we stopped being able to talk with people who had different ideas, and we started hating them.
Hmm.
And the series of um, disruptive administrations in the United States were replicated in most countries of the world. Not Bhutan, because they have as many monks, more monks than police and soldiers, but in most countries of the world, it was replicated, and we see that still going on today. So the amount of hatred was is profound. That's enough to put most people off their game. How do you lead people in a situation like that? Now, let me come to your specific question.
That's my
So,
question. Yeah.
yeah, and now, oddly enough, the characteristics that enabled you to do that well were the same ones that enabled you to be an effective leader in the 90s. That hasn't changed. Everybody says, oh, the nature of leadership has changed. Bullshit. It hasn't. What's changed is that it's so much more evident that so many people are mediocre or not up to it.
Hmm.
That's what's changed. We've looked behind the curtain at Oz, and a lot of folks are just shown to be not up to it.
And when you say
So
up to it, the kind of leadership needed to really lead
being an
kind
effective leader, I
of.
mean,
Hmm.
helping people feel inspired. Leaders are not supposed to manage strategic plans. They're not supposed to make financial decisions. They're supposed to inspire others to do those things.
Hmm.
I mean, I was just saying to 150 undergraduates the other day in a guest spot at a case that the leader's job is to build relationships, not to
Hmm.
manage plans. It's not to manage budgets. It's not to make hire fire decisions, although those are activities they should do. But the real challenge is for them to build relationships, because without the right kind of relationships, they're not a leader. I mean, you have to have followers to be leaders. And
Hmm.
just because somebody reports to you doesn't mean they're following you. They could be spitting in your coffee as they bring it to you, which we know, from a lot of work is mostly true. Now that people don't literally, I hope, spit in people's coffee, but they ignore them.
Mm-hmm.
So, now it's commonly accepted that people don't leave jobs, they don't leave organizations, they leave managers.
Yeah.
Those are people that are not inspiring. So we also see not only lousy motivation numbers in terms of engagement, skyrocketing loneliness, amounts of stress reported higher than the tasks require,
Mm-hmm.
but we also see a continued lack of innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is abysmal how little companies innovate. And again, it has to, are the people inspired to bring their all?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in 1981, I was giving a speech for the American Management Association. And before I went on stage to give this keynote, he was in San Francisco at the time. But anyway, their VP of PR was there, and I'd helped them develop a master's program and to compete with MBAs, and so I knew the folks at the AMA, but I didn't know all parts of the organization. So I said to this VP of PR, by the way, how many people work at the AMA? And he said, oh, about half. And I thought to myself, this is the head of PR.
Yeah.
But okay, now joke aside, that's reality.
Mm-hmm.
People don't bring their juice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when we look at companies that are exceptional for their continued innovation, we go gaga over them. And either we learn to love them and idolize them, or we learn to hate them because they continue to um, break ground and innovate in ways that we never thought we even needed. I mean, the Googles, the Apples, the Elon Musk, people are innovating and they suffer the consequence either by becoming idolized or hated, depending
Mm.
upon where you are. But I start with the data that says if people are going to be effective leaders today, they have to think about how do you inspire others
Mm-hmm.
because you're not doing the job alone. Actually, as one of my friends used to say, in most large organizations, if you're in the upper echelons, you have people reporting to you who are managing people who are reporting to them, who are managing people who are reporting to them, who are managing people who actually do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So there's usually 6 levels between
Mm.
you and the people who do the work. So it gives you a hint as to how powerful the effect of the inspiration has to be, that it has to filter through 5 or 6 levels of people, each of whom have their own idiosyncrasies and ways of twisting the data.
Yeah.
So effective leaders create relationships, and we now have, over 50 published studies showing this very, very clearly in private sector, public sector, and nonprofit sector, that the qualities of the effective leadership relationship aren't the things that a lot of people like to tout, like getting results. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you don't get results, you don't survive anyway.
Right.
But one is there is a high degree of shared vision
Mm-hmm.
and not goals. This is very important. Not goals. Goals activate a neural network that closes you down to new ideas. That's why every time you add another metric to the dashboard, you're shutting down innovation in the
Mm.
people in the organization. But vision, sense of purpose, the big idea, the meaning behind it. Now, the reason that works, we now know from the neurological studies that a bunch of us have been doing, is because an inspiring vision invokes hope. And hope is one of those core human primal emotions that is really good. Helps you open up your brain, open up to other people, helps your immune system. I mean, it's positive in many, many ways. A second characteristic is that effective leadership, we call them resonant leader relationships because they're in tune with the people around them, have a high degree of shared compassion.
Hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean you're turning into a social worker or a therapist, but you care about the people. You don't
Hmm.
just see them as a human resource, which is the most dehumanizing thing you could do. I mean, it's another way of saying you're a cog in the wheel.
Hmm.
And if people feel like they're just an instrument for somebody else's purpose, why should they continue to work hard? So every time you have a leader who says, our shareholders and our stock valuation is the most important stakeholder, that person's an idiot because they haven't noticed that their employees have their whole families at stake.
Hmm.
Their vendors have, their families and companies at stake. The community has their schools at stake. I mean, yes, stockholders are important, but let's be clear, all they have at stake is money. So they are one of the stakeholders, but to say that they're a primary stakeholder is silly. That's just as narrow as to say the only thing important, the only function important in an organization is HR. That would be similarly silly. But shared compassion means that people feel like you care for them, not just in general, but them, and they care back. The third characteristic is interesting, and it has to do with the degree of shared energy.
Hmm.
And when people say to me, well, what does that mean? I'll say, do you know a couple, whether a married couple or two partners who one loves to dance and the other can't stand it? It's a constant source of friction in their first 20 or 30 years of their relationship. Or, one loves to travel and the other doesn't. Those are gross examples of a couple where they're not in tune with each other around shared energy.
Hmm.
It's the same thing at an organizational level. So it really all comes down to, are the relationships that the people in the leadership positions have with the people around them ones where people feel excited to come to work?
Hmm.
Yes, sometimes that means they feel challenged and they have to push themselves, but that's a part of being up for it.
Hmm.
Um, that's what we need today. But honestly, according to the data, that's what we needed 30 years ago, too.
Yeah, I hear you saying
Um,
that we've been through major changes before in our
yeah,
evolution. Now feels like a particular time because so many people in this time haven't experienced some of the major changes from the past. So it feels very personal and very unrooting, kind of unrooting.
yeah,
And we need leaders who know how to lead in such a way that they create a truly shared vision, not one that you just tell people, here's the vision, but truly shared
that's right.
and shared, held by more, the leader and their team, their group, their family, whoever. Shared compassion, and then shared energy. I love that you brought that up. We've been measuring some of these qualities that you're talking about, and we call it relational energy. So very,
Yeah. Well, that's
yeah.
a variable. I think Kim Cameron had an early article on that that we tapped into when we were um, revising, because I first designed the test of that we used in the research in '07. But
Mhm.
Kylie Rochford, who's on the faculty at Utah, and I redid it in 2014, and we used Kim's paper on relational energy
Mm.
as one of the indicators. But yes, you're right. So interestingly enough, it feels all, if not overwhelming, brand new. So that part of the sensation is true,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it's not like we need new ways to deal with it. So
Yeah.
yes, um, there are certain things that are new. One of the new things is it's not the amount of hatred going on socially and politically. I mean, hell, any of us who lived through the 60s and into the early 70s were there before.
Mhm.
Um, and that was going on. And unlike some of the people who bandy about words and labels like fascist, they've never lived in a country that was, or they've
Mhm.
never lived in a communist country. Because if you have, you realize that there's nothing that's happened in the United States that comes even close to that, either from the left or the right. Um, and talked to folks who grew up in Soviet bloc countries prior to 1989, where they couldn't, not only as I have talked and worked with many, they couldn't acknowledge a dream that they had, but they couldn't even tell their family members because a sibling could turn them in, and in
Hmm.
3 days they'd be on a train to the gulag.
Hmm.
Or in places in many European countries or Latin American countries or Middle Eastern countries where, I mean, in some cases, even today, the kind of people that protest in the United States and feel they're being oppressed would actually be executed in other countries without any of those rights. So um, I'm going to take away the inappropriate use of a lot of these labels that people throw at each other,
Hmm.
and just say what's going on. We've got a lot of hatred going on. Let's face it, it's born in a lot of narcissism. I mean, as I said in chapter 9 of our 2019 book, when did the selfie become the most popular form of photography?
Hmm.
I mean, and the only way out of narcissism is to think about others, not to hate others, but to think about others.
Hmm.
So I think that's the kind of, we're asking a lot of people to, in a sense, return to some form of decency, um, and to not always assume that just because somebody who disagrees with you that they're either stupid, naive, or evil.
Hmm.
That maybe they have a different set of thoughts, and wouldn't it be interesting to listen to them and then to figure out what's going on? The one thing that feels dramatically different today is artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
But let's be clear. I mean, in chapter 1 of my recent book, I quoted um, a person who was known to have given a number of speeches at the time, railing against new technologies and how they were destroying people's souls and taking away the very character of what people do. And these were quotes from the Archbishop Trithemius in 1485 or 1585, railing against um, movable print.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when you read, some of his essays, you say, "My God, that's what people are, freaking out about artificial intelligence today." So again, it's not like we haven't been there before, but and I saw an article, I don't know, it was the Wall Street Journal or where it was just last week, saying, "Are we starting to realize that some of this is hype?"
Hmm.
We'll see. Will artificial intelligence, large language models, et cetera, change a lot of things? Yes. Um, will it change jobs? So did the computer. So did this. I mean,
Right.
being able to look, companies like BetterUp and Ezra and these various large coaching organizations really only function today on a global scale because of the internet, Zoom, and these kinds of meetings. I mean,
Yeah,
as
these
I say to
platforms.
many of the coaching groups I talk to, today a coach can have 5 or 8 coaching sessions a day.
Hmm.
You used to be able to have 1 or 2 because you'd have to drive to a place or fly to it, have your session, and then come home. Um, so, yes, it's going to change things. Um, but I think your question is an accurate reflection of the sense of fear.
Hmm.
And I would say that we are witnessing a period in which there's a lot of fear. Unless, and fear, like stress. is very often useful because it helps us defend against threat, but it's not healthy. It's not good for you. I
Hmm.
mean, stress, even a small amount of stress, your cell phone dropping a call, compromises you and leads to cognitive impairment, emotional impairment, and perceptual impairment. So, if you ever talk to somebody who says, "Oh, I love stress. I perform at my best," um, you're talking to an idiot because the human brain doesn't work that way. The body doesn't work that way. And if somebody says, "Well, there's good stress," that's also stupid. Um, I mean, it's not just wrong; it's stupid.
Mm.
Um, that
Do you link that to, Richard, how do you link that with challenge? How would you see
ah,
this as different, challenge versus stress then?
a few years ago, my wife worrying about whether or not I would really live up to my promise to her and retire when I turned 80, which I will in a year, but I still haven't retired and I'm still working full time. She, I mean, never really read my stuff because she finds it too boring, but she has heard me give a lot of talks and talk about vision. So she really pushed me to start to think about what I'd love to do that I'm not doing now.
Hmm.
So she got me thinking back, like in high school, I was on our varsity team in the riflery, target shooter, not a hunter. And then I did it at MIT. So I kind of explored that and decided, no, I didn't really want to get back into that. But then she reminded me of my music. I guess I think we had a group in high school that played maybe somewhere between 50 and 70. We can't remember paying gigs. And we only played two rock and roll ones, and this is the early 60s. Um, but we played Italian weddings, Greek christenings, American Legion dances, Republican Club, Democratic Club, etc. It made enough. I helped to pay for part of a year at MIT, but by the time I got to MIT, I couldn't keep that up because you don't play paying gigs without continuing to rehearse every night, and I couldn't do that at MIT. So plus, the union scale in Boston was a third of what it was in New York. So even the payback ratio wasn't good. So we started, one Saturday morning a month, maybe jamming. And occasionally, when I was running the research companies and I'd be home for a weekend um, writing, I'd interrupt it and grab my guitar and walk around the house playing or singing. But on the whole, I've been away from it for 60 years. So my wife had suggested that I just think about that. And one of my good friends, who's a professional jazz pianist and a faculty member, um, had just taken some courses at Berklee School of Music, the second largest music school in the US, second only to Juilliard. And he said, by the way, because he was taking them to learn bass, he said, by the way, their online courses are actually pretty good. And even though I live in Boston and Berklee's in Boston, but negotiating my schedule to go to a lesson or a class even once a week would be crazy. But the online sounded intriguing. So I've now finished 2 years, and I now am studying with one of the faculty who is a professional jazz guitarist before I
Fantastic.
take the next course. Um, Now, go directly to the question you asked.
Hmm.
Learning some of the new scales, how to go in and out of a Dorian and a Mixolydian scale, how to integrate, um, a major seventh and then move into, a minor seventh, flat five, and then create a tension with the ninth or the 13th on it. Um, is all really challenging.
Hmm.
And just yesterday, I was practicing, part of my lesson for the week on doing a bunch of different chord changes while I was trying to vamp to a particular jazz tune. And I, after 30 or 40 minutes, my fingers were starting to hurt. It it wasn't, I mean, the moment that I was working on it wasn't fun. It was a challenge, but I was doing it because of why. And overall, I'm I can express myself today with my instruments so much better than I could have 2 years ago. I mean,
Hmm.
it's dramatic. But, I went through, I mean, at the beginning, there was 6 weeks in which my fingers felt like they were on fire every time I touched something, just, getting back into it. So challenge and going into moments of stress is a part of the change process. I
Yeah.
talk about that in my intentional change theory, that you have to go back and forth between these moments in the positive and negative emotional attractor. You need both.
Hmm.
But what makes it sustainable is the
Hmm.
key.
Hmm.
What makes it sustainable, in contrast to every diet anybody who's volume challenged has ever been on, none of which are sustainable, is you have a bigger sense of purpose, or you love what you're doing, or it it just does something else inside of you.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a bigger sense of this. I'm very personally relating to this, by the way. My husband's a bass player and
Ah,
is in a band, and then we are in a band together for our community, our neighborhood, and put on a concert once a year, really for purposes of community building, like really to just have the
right.
community come together and have fun. But we start 6 months in advance, really planning out this whole event, and it's challenging because I work
What do
full
you
time and
play?
I am singer and percussion, and he is a singer and a bass player. And then we've got two other people in the group who also play
Wow.
guitar, and
So which part of percussion you doing?
I'm just all whether it's djembe drum, shakers,
Okay, so you're not
tambourine.
doing the drum set,
No, I'm
laying
not
down
doing the
the
drum set.
backbeat.
No,
Got it.
no, no, I'm not doing that. In fact, that's mostly David with the bass is, really the
Oh, right.
foundational beat. So I
So I
really,
was just listening to a it was on one of the not YouTube, Netflix or something, but it was a biopic on Santana.
oh, wow.
And I mean, he'd have one guy with the whole drum set, and then he'd have another guy with the whole drum set, and then he'd have one on the conga drums, and then he'd
Yes.
have none on a. I mean, he had 5 different people playing drum sets.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We just watched a documentary on Earth, Wind, and Fire last night.
Right.
And a similar, just so many people and the bigness of the sound and the joy that you can tell they're
Right.
just in joy together. And then it's just infectious with the crowd. Talk about
Yeah.
relational energy. I mean, really talking about the energy that's created through that. But I guess I'm bringing that up because I understand what you're saying about the difference between challenge. Of course, when we start prepping, you have to create a vision, you get clear about your purpose, but then
Yeah.
there's practice. Then there's the discipline of practice, practice, practice. And then there's always some point, which I'm sure you know, that it's the music is good enough, but it's not, there's so much that you want to
Yeah. Yeah.
refine
Yeah.
and woodshed. And so you get to that 5% that, doing that 5%, which is always the hardest part, because now it's good enough. You could perform, but it's not exactly what you want it to be yet. So,
I actually use that as an example, and not just in the book, but even in my talks about one characteristic of this negative emotional attractor is where you practice to the point of comfort, like what you
hmm,
have to do for your instructor.
hmm,
But in the positive emotional attractor, you're driven to a point of mastery.
hmm. Interesting.
And in music, it has to do with, when do you stop having to read this stuff and you're just listening to it and moving to it?
Yeah, yeah.
No, those are great examples, Renee. Those are
Uh,
great examples.
well, you brought it up with your examples because I'm really
Yeah,
connecting with all the stuff that you're doing and happy to know about the classes, by the way. I'll let David know about these classes that are online because he's always
yeah.
looking. I mean, they play out twice a month, but he'll practice 2 hours a day,
Yeah.
pretty much every day.
Well, and Frank said, he took the whole stream, and then he ended up doing a few paying gigs as a bass player, although um, his regular paying jobs are as a pianist. Meanwhile, he's a full-time senior faculty member. But at any rate, um, but the online courses at Berkeley are really good, and they're all professionals that have been doing this for 30 years plus. So
Yeah. So I know
anyway,
we're
back
coming
to
to.
your theme.
Well, but this is related though. It really is
Yeah.
related. I'm wondering, and I know we don't have much time left. I'm wondering these ideas that you've shared about having a shared vision, shared compassion,
Right.
shared energy. Underlying that, and I'm noticing this more in my conversations, either coaching conversations or working with executive teams, or we also certify people to bring sort of the science of resilience and thriving into their work
Right.
as coaches and leaders. Um, I'm noticing way more conversation now about self-regulation, just the basic skills for self-regulation, which for me seem to be almost fundamental to having a shared vision, shared energy, shared compassion. And I'm wondering, in your work, I see it all through your
Yeah.
work as
Let's
well.
let me ratchet it up.
Yeah,
I think
please.
self-regulation is almost a mechanical way of talking about it. I think at the heart of what we were just talking about is the first challenge for anybody in a leadership or position of responsibility, even for parents,
Hmm.
which is, are you excited about your life?
Hmm.
And in my terms, physiologically, are you, and we even have people kind of sample these in terms of ordinary minutes during each day, are you having more brief PEA moments in the day than these moments of even mild stress?
And
And we
PEA,
published the
just
research. I'm
for
sorry.
PEA, I know what that
Oh,
is.
that's the
For that.
positive emotional attractor. It's being stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, the renewal system in the body. It's mostly stimulating a neural network called technically the default mode network that's more
Hmm.
empathic.
Hmm.
And it's literally using positive affect.
Hmm.
But it has the effect of inflating, in a sense, or reinflating the energy that you have inside. Whereas the negative emotional attractor, while it's crucial for getting things done, has the effect of deflating
Yeah.
what you're doing. The crucial first thing that people should be worried about, what's happening to them,
Hmm.
because we now know that wasn't as clear. I mean, actually, in uh, Deanna Troi, the Betazoid empath on the bridge of Star Trek: The Second Generation, the empath did this, but and that was in in the the 90s, 80s. We now know since 2000 that that's actually how it works. Humans, unless they're on the spectrum, are picking up the unconscious, um, literally brain waves of people around them. And
Hmm.
it's happening in 8 to 40 thousandths of a second, which
Hmm.
is way below consciousness. So it doesn't have to do with what you think you're showing, it has to do with what you're really feeling. So
Hmm.
even if you're smiling on the outside, if you're feeling like crap on the inside, that's what's infecting people around
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So we know that that's happening all the time. So the question I pose is, how are you infecting the people around you? And how can you be inspirational if what you're giving off is, oh my God, another day of work?
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
can't. So your first responsibility is to make sure that you're living a life that you love. I mean, it may not be perfect, but you're moving toward that
Hmm.
and you're feeling energy and revitalization and excitement. And if
Do you
you're
have,
not, that's where people use the self regulation. But self regulation makes it sound like what I have to do is tune the faucets.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
It's different. It's like, are you moving your spirit or not?
Yeah. Do you have any research on, I had heard some research, but this was years ago and I haven't been able to find it since, on the amount of time that if you are in more of an absorbed, like a flow state in your day, that would link to your sense of overall well-being. And at the time, I remember it being about an hour and a half, but I have not been able to find that research.
Yeah,
And
I
I'm
don't remember that number, but
okay.
what I do know from some studies that we published a few years ago, that it's more important. Look, everything in life is going to bring you into this negative attractor.
Mm-hmm.
because everything is going to push you to solve problems, make decisions, and survive.
Mm-hmm.
Your body will overtake the niceties of being open to new people or ideas to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to, and our organizations do this, our families, a lot of people do this, put a lot more of this negative uh, pressure on us. Therefore, the challenge is, can you spread out more 10 to 15-minute moments of what I call PEA throughout the day? I mean,
Okay.
it's more important to have six of them spread out in the day than to have an hour and a half at lunch.
Okay. Okay.
Because, and you think about this logically, physiologically, you're in a mild or acute stress episode, other stressors are hammering away at you. What's going on? Your epinephrine levels are going up and up. Your cortisol levels are going up, which means your immune system is shut down. Your neurogenesis is shut down. You're cognitively impaired at this point. With your peripheral vision goes from like 180 degrees down to 30. All these things are happening. So what you need to do is periodically interrupt the flow.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're an experienced meditator or yoga or you exercise a lot, um, I mean, I used to teach meditation in the 70s when I was doing therapy with alcoholics and then got into Tai Chi for a while. But, I'm not bragging, just that, in 90 seconds of deep breathing exercises, I can flip my hormones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if I don't do that regularly, I sink into the muck and the mire.
Yeah.
Um, and that ends up being, well, possibly for you as a musician, I'll bet you that during a day, there is a moment in which you might think of a particular song
Mm-hmm.
or put one on. I mean, right now, one tune that is working wonders for me is I'll put on the Lucy Thomas interpretation of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah.
Mm.
I heard there was
Beautiful.
a secret chord.
Yes.
It's just, boy, 60 seconds of that. And, it's not that many years ago, actually about 4 or 5 years ago, it was the Four Seasons. Um, oh, what a night. Anyway,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the idea is, I think it's more important, regardless of the flow state business, is to have a set of things at your disposal so that happens. Now, of the things that medical research and psychological research continue to validate that help stimulate this PEA, NEA I'm talking about. I mean, I list maybe 18 of them that seem to cross genders, races, everything in chapter 3. But about half of them are things you do by yourself, like meditation, yoga, deep breathing,
Mm-hmm.
prayer, exercise. But half of them are things you do with others.
Mm.
Being in a loving relationship, helping people less fortunate, laughing with others, playing music, by the way, not just listening, but playing music is
Mm-hmm.
one of those things that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system.
Mm-hmm. That is, I love that you're reinforcing this. I really do love that you're reinforcing this because it feels like what you're talking about is something that, and I agree, by the way, wholeheartedly, it's something that people can actually do.
Yeah.
So you notice, you notice, first you have to notice. You have to notice and
Yep.
know that often we get into this state of more of a contracted worldview, more contracted physiology, more this,
Yeah.
more
Right.
myopic. And just to know that and to know, and then you have the power to decide what are some practices I can do throughout my day that are like reset, 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 and they help you expand. What opens up creativity, opens up your desire to be in relationship with people. It opens up so
Yeah.
much. But it feels like something very practical that people can do. I
It
think
is.
when we're working with people and it's around their what is your purpose, what is your vision, all of that is incredibly important. And when people get clear, it's such a navigational tool, like
Right.
a guiding framework for them, which is wonderful. But for some people, it's a big lift. It's a heavy lift to, oh my gosh, what is my purpose? I have no idea. Like almost like that's a heaviness But what you're talking about right now
Yeah.
are what are the micro practices?
Small doses,
What are the small
small
doses?
doses.
Yeah. So I
So
know.
I also want you to consider bringing your music into a part of your offerings to your clients.
Oh,
Get
what a
them to
great
sing
idea.
together.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I used to
actually,
watch Ben Zander, the conductor who wrote the Art of Possibility. I mean, he was doing a keynote before I was in London once, and then I saw again and several times in the U.S. And he'll get up there with a piano and he'll get a whole audience of 600, 800 people, kind of different parts of the room singing something and working together.
I
And
love it. I love it.
yeah,
Richard, I appreciate the conversation with you very much. The work that you're doing has really been so vital to so many things, but definitely to the work we're doing, and I'm
yeah.
very appreciative.
Thank you, Renee. This has been different and fun.